New leadership. President Trump nominates a UN ambassador and an attorney general. Condemning Saudi Arabia. U.S. senators consider measures to punish the Crown Prince for the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. We're on Capitol Hill. Laid to rest. Former President George H.W. Bush is buried at his presidential library in Texas. And Christmas is coming. The Vatican unveils a sandy nativity scene and lights its tree in St. Peter's Square. We're at the Vatican. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, December 7th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Two key positions in the Trump administration will soon see change. President Trump has nominated a new ambassador to the United Nations, and the former Attorney General under President George H.W. Bush is being tapped once again. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. If confirmed by the Senate, William Barr would lead the Department of Justice. Matt Whitaker has been filling in after President Trump forced Jeff Sessions out as Attorney General. President Trump calls Barr a brilliant man.
He was my first choice from day one, respected by Republicans and respected by Democrats. He will be nominated for the United States Attorney General, and hopefully that process will go very quickly.
Democrats will want assurances William Barr won't interfere with special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into possible collusion between the 2016 Trump campaign and Russia. The president calls it a witch hunt. Today, he said his legal team is already drafting a rebuttal. As Attorney General, Barr would oversee the probe. The president is also praising Heather Nauert, his replacement pick for Nikki Haley, as ambassador to the UN.
She's very talented, very smart, very quick, and I think she's going to be respected by all.
Nauert, a Catholic, has been spokesperson for the State Department since April 2017. Previously, she was a reporter for Fox News. Nauert may face questions during the nomination process about her foreign policy experience. President Trump promised to make another big announcement tomorrow at the Army-Navy game in Philadelphia. The commander-in-chief says it will affect the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the military leaders at the Pentagon. Early reports predict he'll tap Army Chief of Staff General Mark Milley to be the next chairman. Wyatt?
Mark, what about the reports that John Kelly, the White House Chief of Staff, is leaving?
Well, this is not the first time that other media outlets have predicted that John Kelly will step down. The White House at this time is not confirming anything. As President Trump often says, we'll see what happens.
Well, we know John Kelly and President Trump have had their butting heads before, so we'll see how it all plays out. White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Senators consider punishing Saudi Arabia for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. The journalist was killed 2 months ago in what U.S. officials describe as an elaborate plot carried out when he visited the Saudi consulate in Turkey. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi has that story. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. Bob Corker, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, says senators are looking at three measures, and all three have a lot of momentum. Corker says the goal is to send a message to Saudi Arabia, a close ally of the U.S.
Senator Lindsey Graham is proposing a resolution that would condemn Saudi Arabia's crown prince, saying he's complicit in the death of Washington Post writer Jamal Khashoggi.
This is an ally. If you get in the orbit of the United States, if you want to buy our weapons and integrate your economy into ours, there's a certain price to be paid. Don't chop somebody up in a consulate.
Khashoggi entered the Saudi consulate in Turkey and disappeared. U.S. intelligence officials have concluded Saudi's crown prince must have known of the murder.
Maybe he did, maybe he didn't.
But the president and Secretary of State are not convinced.
I do believe I've read every piece of intelligence, unless it's come in the last few hours. I think I've read it all. There is no direct reporting connecting the crown prince to the order to murder Jamal Khashoggi.
President Trump says the U.S. intends to remain a steadfast partner of Saudi Arabia, touted an arms deal worth billions, and thanked the country for plunging oil prices.
It's all about America first. We're not going to give up hundreds of billions of dollars in orders and let Russia, China, and everybody else have them.
The chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee says the U.S. can still punish Saudi Arabia.
People talk about Russia, China. There's only one country that's going to come to the aid of Saudi Arabia if Iran is going to do something against them, and that's us, and they know that.
Another proposal would suspend the sale of U.S. arms to the kingdom.
We espouse American values all around the world, and to say that, well, no, they're going to buy some arms from us, and so, it's okay to kill a journalist sends exactly the wrong message about who we are as a country.
It's unclear how strong the Senate's message will be. The Senate is expected to vote next week on the Yemen resolution, but senators are wrestling with how to limit amendments to prevent a freewheeling floor debate that would allow votes on unrelated issues. Wyatt?
Jason, do any of these proposals have a chance at passing?
Republican House leaders haven't indicated if they'll take up any of the measures. That means any action here in the Senate is likely to be symbolic for now. Speaker-designate Nancy Pelosi says the House will get briefed next week on the Khashoggi investigation.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. House Republicans who interviewed former FBI Director James Comey today say they are not satisfied with his answers. It was the first time Comey answered lawmakers' questions since an explosive June 2016 hearing. In that hearing, he said President Trump fired him to interfere with his FBI investigation of alleged Russia ties to the Trump campaign. Democrats say today's questioning is a distraction from the probe. A U.S. attorney in Ohio says an American priest living in the Philippines sexually abused multiple altar boys.
I mean, it's horrifying. It is horrible, abusive conduct. It is grooming children, young children, who are interested in being involved in church activities and taking those kids and sexually abusing them.
Benjamin Glassman says one victim reported more than 40 sexual encounters with Father Kenneth Bernard Hendricks. Hendricks is a Cincinnati native. He's charged with engaging in illicit sexual conduct in the Philippines. The Archdiocese of Los Angeles updates its tally of priests accused of child sex abuse for the first time in a decade. 54 additional priests are now on the list, bringing the total to 323 clerics. A spokeswoman says most of the priests were added to the list were accused more than a decade ago. Only 3 have been accused since then. The Diocese of Mobile in Alabama releases the names of 29 priests, deacons, and other religious men who have been credibly accused of sexual misconduct. The allegations there date all the way back to 1950. A letter from Archbishop Thomas Rhodey says 17 of them are dead and 12 others are prohibited from ministry. The Vatican has launched an investigation into a small religious order in Chile. Some sisters denounce sexual abuse at the hands of priests and mistreatment by priests. Vatican investigators are currently gathering testimony. Pope Francis has published new laws governing the Vatican city-state. They include the creation of a new oversight body. It's part of the Vatican's efforts at reform and transparency, a goal of the Holy Father. And Pope Francis makes a surprise visit to the sick. The Vatican says the Holy Father wanted to resume his Mercy Fridays. He visited with needy patients who are being treated in clinics on the outskirts of Rome. The Pope spent time with people and blessed children. Coming up, we take you to former President George H.W. Bush's final resting place. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The March for Life, the annual event in response to the Supreme Court's 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, will be held on January 18th. This year's theme is unique from day one: pro-life is pro-science. Jeannie Mancini, president of the March for Life, joins us now. Jeannie, welcome back. What are some of the scientific discoveries you're going to highlight this year?
Well, essentially, every single year there are wonderful new technologies being developed that show the humanity of the child earlier and earlier. So, for example, at this stage in the game, and it's so different than even a year or two ago, you can tell a child's sex by 7 weeks when they take a blood test. It's just unbelievable. Or you can see a baby's heartbeat at 6 weeks of development. See and hear a baby's heartbeat. We're also seeing all sorts of advances in perinatal surgery, for example, for spina bifida. If you look at 20 years ago, they were doing different operations while the baby was in the womb, and it helped them tremendously through life. Now it's almost curing the child of spina bifida. So there are just enormous advances in technology. And as we say, science and technology are really on the side of life, mostly because they show the humanity of the unborn child.
Sure. So you announced that Ben Shapiro, who's particularly popular conservative among young people, well, he'll speak at the event. He'll do his podcast live on the stage. Do you expect to expand the reach and get more young people on board?
We always hope to do that in every possible way. And it's so interesting that you asked this question, because my nieces and nephews who listen to him almost every single day were the ones who said, can you get Ben Shapiro for the March for Life? And it was a fun little story that Ben agreed to tweet at my nephew for his birthday that got us talking about getting him to the March for Life. So absolutely, my own experience is that young people adore Ben, and he's so great. So we're really excited to have him at the March for Life this year.
Very good. Well, President Trump's nominee for Attorney General, William Barr, formerly served as Attorney General under President George H.W. Bush. And of course, during his confirmation hearings for that post, he said he did not believe in the right to privacy extends to abortion. So my question is, do you think Barr will continue to support pro-life policies?
Well, we're very hopeful. Of course, we're all sort of looking, and this is a new announcement today, but we're very hopeful, particularly in his role, that he'd look into Planned Parenthood. Of course, there's this ongoing investigation into Planned Parenthood and the trafficking of little hearts, little lungs, little livers of babies who are developing. And the Justice Department hasn't brought that to fruition yet. So we need to see what's happening, and we're very hopeful that this new nominee will look into that a little bit more.
Do you worry that his pro-life stance will be an issue during confirmation? So many people who are pro-life just get bashed, basically.
It's amazing. This is one of the few issues that is looked at just under the microscope. So I guess, yes. I mean, in a word, we saw the Kavanaugh hearings and what have you. So in a word, yes. But should that disqualify him? Absolutely not.
Just because, like I said, it's controversial to some people doesn't mean they can't stand for what they believe in. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recently released data showing that abortion rates is continuing to decline in the United States.
Right.
Good thing for us, but what are some of the challenges, do you think, for pro-lifers in the years ahead?
Two things. Changing hearts and minds. So we absolutely work for abortion to become unthinkable, in our culture. So not only that we change the laws, which is wonderful and really important, and these things go hand in glove, but really changing hearts and minds. And I think that's what's impacting the downtick. Women know after they have an abortion that they're hurting. Abortion takes the life of one and wounds the life of another. And so we work towards changing hearts and minds, and I would think that that's our biggest obstacle. We also have so many problems with legislation. Even with the pro-life Congress, we weren't able to pass in the Senate a late-term abortion ban, which is popular with mainstream America for 10 years strong. So we certainly have our work cut out for us in changing hearts and minds, and I would say in legislation.
Well, it's so interesting to hear about all this and obviously all the scientific aspects of this as well. So we thank you for coming on. We're looking forward to the March for Life. Jeannie Mancini, president of the March for Life, thanks so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Texans honor President George H.W. Bush with a heartfelt goodbye. Thousands waved and cheered along the route as the funeral train carried his remains to their final resting place in College Station. A 70-mile journey to a final resting place. A special Union Pacific train, Bush 4141, carrying President George H.W. Bush, arrived at College Station, Texas, yesterday afternoon. Crowds gathered in the rain to say farewell to the 41st president at his namesake library. His family watched as his casket was removed from the train in a final ceremony, followed by a 21-gun salute and U.S. Navy 21 aircraft memorial flyover in the Missing Man formation to honor the life of a man who gave a lifetime of service to his country. This all before Bush was laid to rest in a private ceremony beside his late wife Barbara and their daughter Robin, who died of leukemia when she was 3. Earlier on Thursday, family and friends shared personal stories at his funeral in Houston.
George Herbert Walker Bush is the most gracious, most decent, most humble man that I will ever know.
Former Secretary of State James Baker delivered a touching eulogy for his best friend, recounting the president's many accomplishments.
After becoming the youngest naval aviator, he served in increasingly responsible positions on behalf of his country,
giving insight into the man behind the presidency and marking the end of a life, but not a legacy.
Because our glory, George, was to have had you as our president and as such a friend.
one of many tributes in Texas and Washington this week to say goodbye to a Navy aviator, a World War II veteran, and the 41st president. Up next, St. Peter's Square lights up as the Christmas tree and nativity scene are unveiled. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Just 2 days after being named host of the Academy Awards, Kevin Hart has stepped down following an outcry over past tweets by the comedian that are being described as homophobic. The tweets mostly dated from 2009 to 2011 and have since been deleted. One had to do with Hart not wanting his son to play with his daughter's dollhouse. Hart apologized for his, quote, insensitive words from his past. Joining me now by Skype from Los Angeles is Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire and the host of the Michael Knowles Show. So Michael, Kevin Hart says he has evolved and changed his views, but he still receives a lot of backlash for his comment. Hollywood stars who often, as you know, voice unpopular and sometimes conservative viewpoints are regularly ostracized. What do you make of all the pressure that's put on entertainers when it comes to these kinds of issues?
Well, I think I know every single conservative Hollywood person. There aren't that many of us out here, and that's certainly the case. But in the case of Kevin Hart, it's not as though he's some rock-ribbed Republican. He's a comedian who made a joke about gay people. Can you find me one comedian on earth who hasn't made a joke about gay people 10 years ago? The comments came. It's not as though he were making some political speech. He told a joke, which is his job. He did it in 2009. He's actually since apologized for it and says he wouldn't tell the joke anymore, in large part because the audiences have changed so much. This gives a lot of credence to what the playwright William Inge said when he said that whoever marries himself to the spirit of the age will find himself a widower in the next. The left is constantly becoming so offended. They are constantly moving the goalposts on what is acceptable even to joke about, that at this point, what we like to do on social media as a culture is find one person who is having any bit of success and then tear him to the ground. There is a mobbing that happens, and one of the lessons from this is that you never can apologize. We saw this from the Me Too movement. All of the people accused of deviant sexual acts who apologized for it were destroyed. The ones who denied it basically were allowed to continue. Same thing here with Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart says, I am repentant. I am sorry. I didn't mean to do that. He said that years ago. They won't take sorry for an answer. So now you have this awful incentive where people who truly are sorry for something, who have changed their mind on something, now have no incentive to change their views or to evolve their views. It's really sad, and heaven help the next person who's offered this job, because our culture is so angry and the left is so unable to have a sense of humor or to laugh these days that we're in a culture where I'm sure they're going to tear down the next selection as well.
Okay, so that's obviously one big talking point. Another talker this week came out of President George H.W. Bush's funeral. It appears as if President Trump did not read out loud the Apostles' Creed along with the rest of the congregation. Criticism immediately popped up on social media. Obviously, President Trump is subject to criticism of all types, but do you think that particular is fair?
You know, if he had read the Apostles' Creed, they would be attacking him for not reading it in Latin, credo in unum Deum, and if he had done that, they would have criticized him for not chanting it. I actually was rather pleased with President Trump in so much as he's being honest. This is a man who has been quite open about being relatively post-Christian in his political views. He was steeped in the religious views of Norman Vincent Peale, the power of positive thinking, and so he doesn't give a performance of something if he isn't constantly attending church services on Sundays or whatever. Meanwhile, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are reciting the Apostles' Creed. Do we really believe that these are devout, practicing Christians who take that faith seriously? I think there is, as Rochefoucauld said, hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. That's fine, but I found President Trump's demurring from that to actually show a bit of humility. The nice thing about Donald Trump is what you see is what you get. He's been wonderful for Christians. He's been wonderful for life and for the unborn. He's been wonderful for religious liberty. He doesn't recite the Apostles' Creed. Would that we had Pope Innocent III come back and serve as president, but we don't, and I simply can't attack him for that, especially when probably he's just being honest.
You mentioned the pro-life issue, and before we go, earlier in the show we heard from Jeannie Mancini, the president of the March for Life. Ben Shapiro, who you work with at the Daily Wire, will be speaking at that event in January. Ben, you have been very vocal about your pro-life views. Tell us what kind of reaction for this engagement.
Ben is very excited. I myself have two reactions, which is excitement for the speech and envy, because it's one of the greatest opportunities for the cultural conservatives and people who really care about the unborn and the pro-life cause in this country. The pro-life movement has grown year over year. The March for Life has grown year over year. We've seen now the major administration figures come and address the pro-life movement. And Ben, I can speak to this. I see him every single day. Ben speaks to such a young audience and such a broad audience. He has the biggest podcast on the right. He attracts people from the center and from the left. He's really speaking to a broad swath of people and to virtually everybody under the age of 40. I think it was a brilliant move for the March for Life to bring him there. I hope that I can make it out to watch it, and I know he's going to do a great job. I know he doesn't like to travel so much because his schedule is so busy, but he wouldn't miss it. It's such a wonderful opportunity for our culture.
I'm sure a lot of young people will be energized to see him. Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire and host of the Michael Knowles Show, thanks so much for talking with us.
Good to see you, Wyatt.
Pope Francis thanks the donors of the Vatican's Christmas tree and nativity scene just before they were unveiled today in St. Peter's Square.
Il presepio posto al centro della piazza.
The Holy Father says the creche helps us to contemplate the mystery of God who became man to be close to each one of us. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from St. Peter's Square in front of the Christmas tree. Juliet, tell us about this year's tree.
Wyatt, it's a 75-foot red pine that was trucked into St. Peter's Square 2 weeks ago from a forest in northeastern Italy. The Pope today told his visitors, who included Wyatt, the Patriarch of Venice, that with its soaring height, the tree symbolizes God. The lights were donated by a well-known Italian lighting company, and they are energy efficient. And the tree comes from an area that suffered severe damage due to harsh storms in the north of Italy earlier this year. Now, once the Christmas season ends, the wood will be used to make children's toys.
Okay, so the tree is obviously getting a lot of attention, but let's turn to the nativity scene. This year it's a little bit unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, the creche is actually made of sand from the northern Italian beach town of Jesolo, and every year that city hosts a special sand sculpting contest to create original sculptures of the Nativity and other Christian stories. Now, sculptors who created the sand nativity are 4 international artists, including American Richard Varano, the lead designer, and he's from New Smyrna in Florida, and he's a full-time sand sculptor, a talent that he actually inherited from his father, who also did it for a living. And Varano told me that he's greatly humbled to be part of this project. And the nativity scene, Wyatt, is 52 feet wide, and I have to say that when you see it up close, it's very impressive.
It's pretty incredible to think about all the work that goes into creating one of those. And I can see that the Christmas lights just came on the tree. Pretty incredible.
What? Did you see that? Perfect timing. Beautiful, isn't it?
Absolutely. Tell me this, Juliet. Like I said, long traditions of nativity scenes. When did the traditions begin?
Wyatt, it was Pope St. John Paul II who started the tradition in 1981, but it actually wasn't until Benedict's papacy in 2012 that the tradition of having a different nativity scene every year was started. Before that, the figures were always the same 19th century statues that were taken from the Church of St. Andrew in the Field here in Rome. Then under Benedict, the Vatican began displaying creches from donors. And last year, the tree came from Poland, and the creche was made by artisans from southern Italy.
Gotta love all of these Catholic traditions there at the Vatican, including the Christmas tree right behind you. Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
So happy we got to see the Vatican's Christmas tree light up right there. And a great way to wrap up our newscast for tonight and for this week. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.